Japan's emperor is retiring, and I bet you he's never played a video game. My fellow weeaboos out there probably know that Japan is getting a new emperor. And the thing is that for counting years, they actually date years based on the emperor. So for the last 30 years, it has been the Heisei Era. Heisei 1 being the year 1989. Now it's like what, Heisei 36? I don't even know. I can't keep track of this stuff. Every time I have to look up a date in the Heisei Era, I have to go to Google. And guess what? Starting May 1st, 2019, it becomes Reiwa. It becomes Reiwa 1. I'm an American, so it's kind of annoying to me, but I'm thinking that even Japanese people sometimes have to do the Google to figure out some of these era years. With a new era, I think, comes a time for retrospection. We have had 30 years of video games to look back on. And while I think dating conventions like this, a 30-year period is pretty arbitrary. I mean, the way we measure a year is pretty scientific. But measuring a 30-year period, what does that even mean? Yet, I think there is still a story to tell. So what I'd like to talk about are some of the games that came out right at the very beginning of the era in 1989. I actually think the first games that would come out are very instructive as to seeing where Japanese games were in 1989 and where they would head. I would also like to say that this is going to be very Japan-focused, so I'm not going to be talking about American release dates. I'm going to be talking about Japanese games and Japanese numbers. And I'd like to start off with the PC Engine, which I don't have on the table here. But the very first game to release in the Heisei Era, the Japanese emperor would die. The country would wait a couple of weeks, and then boom! The PC Engine would release Vigilante, which was, it's a fine game. It looks more like, bumper cars with nunchucks. But it's exciting. It's got, for the time, were some pretty amazing visuals. And then what else do we have coming out as a first for the Heisei Era? We've got Alex Kidd and the Enchanted Castle, coming out in February 1989. They would wait a whole month to release a game for the Mega Drive, which had only just come out in 1988. I should point out that the PC Engine and the Mega Drive, they are the newest kids on the block. They're bringing power, they're bringing games, well, not a whole lot of games actually, and I'll bring that up in just a moment. Because what would come out for the Famicom? This is the elephant in the room. This is the console to beat. The Famicom, released in 1983, which is seen very much as a console of the previous era, the Showa era. The Famicom is dominating the video game scene. But what's coming out for it in 1989? Well, I'll tell you. First up, we've got Kyotaro Nishimura's Murder on the Blue Train, which is a visual novel. I really don't even know what else to say. Kyotaro Nishimura, he's got a Wikipedia page. He's apparently a fairly well-known murder mystery writer. And then next up, we've got Satomi Hakkenden that would release on the same day. And it's a Dragon Quest clone. It's apparently based on an old Japanese novel that has 106 volumes to it. It's something that's the novel behind it may be epic, but the game does not really appear so, if I'm going to be honest. What I'd like to talk about is very much where Nintendo was in the year 1989, because we've recently been celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Game Boy. I've got the Game Boy Pocket right here. This would set the tone for the next 30 years of video gaming. And I'll tell you why. Because if you look at 1989 and what was coming, the Famicom was old. It was ancient. The games for it would get some pretty good games for it late in its life. But in 1989, the Famicom is very much showing its age. You've got the PC Engine and the Mega Drive out there, and they're upping graphics. They're upping gameplay. But in Japan, they don't do all that well. When you look at the number of games, I've got them written down here. The Famicom in 1989, the first year of the Heisei Era, it would have 147 games. The Mega Drive had 21. Now remember, this is the first full calendar year of the Mega Drive, or the Genesis. I think this was very much a time period when people didn't really know what the next generation of gaming would look like. The PC Engine would release 74 games in 1989. So a lot, but still half as much as the Famicom. What have we got coming up? It's 1989, the Game Boy is on the horizon, but what else is coming out? Oh, the Super Famicom. This would come out in 1990, the second year. And this would absolutely obliterate the Mega Drive in Japan. See, what's interesting to me is that in America, the Super Nintendo and the Genesis were almost neck and neck. They sold just over 20 million consoles each. I think the Super Nintendo was like at what, 24 million? The Genesis was at like 22 million or something, but you know, fairly close to each other. But in Japan, this boy would absolutely smash it. The Super Famicom sold 17 million consoles in Japan. The Mega Drive sold 3.5 million consoles. This is actually part of the reason why eventually the Dreamcast would be the last of Sega's console. I feel even very much getting out from the gate, Sega was in a really bad position in Japan, but that's a whole nother story. What I wanted to talk about particularly here and now as the story of the Heisei Era, the story of the last 30 years, is the fact that Japan has always been a portable market. And now this is, I'm sure, not really shocking anybody. Pretty much everybody who's studied this has known it. But I was really blown away by looking at the console sales numbers of consoles released in the last 30 years. Maybe this will be as shocking to you guys as it was to me, but when you look at the top 5 selling consoles of the last 30 years, it's been absolutely no contest. The freaking DS is the best-selling Japanese console of the last 30 years. It sold 33 million units, which is like, holy crap, that's absolutely insane to me. Next up, we've got the Game Boy, which I'm assuming is including Game Boy Pocket, the original Game Boy, and all of the color variants. That's got 32.5 million units sold. Thing is, the only console, the only home console to break into the top 5 selling consoles in Japan is your boy right here, the PlayStation 2. And it's actually the 4th best-selling console. After the Game Boy, it would be the 3DS, coming in at 25 million units, and the PlayStation 2 would actually lose to the 3DS. It would come in at number 4, selling 22 million units. And what would be the 5th best-selling console of the last 30 years, you might ask? Why, it would be the PSP, clocking in at 19.2 million units. Once again, the best 4 selling consoles. Well, 4 of the top 5 best-selling consoles in the last 30 years in Japan have been portable units. I wasn't shocked to learn that portable gaming was so very strong in Japan. I was just shocked to see that it was this freaking strong. Now, what about the best-selling games in Japan? Well, no surprise, 9 of the top 10 best-selling games in Japan in the last 30 years have been portable games, folks. 5 of the top 10 best-selling games have been Pokemon games. 5 different generations of Pokemon games. The only non-Nintendo game to break into the top 10 of the Heisei Era was Monster Hunter Freedom for the PSP. One speaking to not only how powerful Nintendo is, but to how strong the PSP did in Japan. The only non-portable game to reach the top 10 in the Heisei Era was, what have I got? I've got it written down here. It was New Super Mario Bros. Wii. That was the best-selling console game of the last 30 years in Japan. When I look back at the last 30 years of Japanese gaming, To me, the Nintendo Switch is, I think, the culmination of the Heisei Era. This is, I think, the system that Nintendo was destined to develop. It is the portable system that is occasionally a console. Just like Nintendo was a portable system seller that occasionally released some well-received consoles. And I think the PlayStation is also another big story out of the Heisei Era. And I think specifically the PlayStation 2, I think, is particularly significant because for me it represents the apex of Japanese game development, but also the beginning of the end for about 10 years, considering that so many Japanese developers had issues in the HD era. But the PlayStation 4 is doing fine, and the Xbox One is whatever. I'm really excited for the future of Japanese video games. The PlayStation 5 specs have just been released, sort of officially, unofficially. I'm not really sure what the deal with that is. The Switch is going strong. We've got new Switch consoles coming out at the end of this year. Reiwa 1. PlayStation 5 is going to be coming out in Reiwa 2. And we've got a whole era. We've got a whole new era of Japanese video games coming out. So I hope this was interesting to you guys. It was very informative for me doing some of this research, looking back on 30 years of Japanese video games. And this is all just surface level stuff, folks. We barely were able to talk about Sega, the rise and fall. We barely were even able to touch on portable gaming. We didn't even talk about all the side consoles like the Neo Geo, all the PC Engine, all of the more specific PC Engine stuff. So much has happened in the last 30 years of video games, and I hope you will join me in going both forward and looking back into the past. I've been your man in Japan, Jay Contra, saying thanks for watching, see you next time, and mahalo.